Welcome to Money Majlis, and thank you for joining me for another illuminating, scintillating episode of your favorite podcast on banking, technology, marketing, and leadership. Joining me today is a very interesting guest who calls himself the Chief Connector. Adrian Simpson, my friend, is based in London and is the founder CEO of a company called Wavelength. I've known Adrian for over a decade now, but before I introduce you to him, here is a message from my sponsors.
Money Majlis is proudly supported by Aqua Now, the premier crypto-as-a-service provider, now building in partnership with the top financial institutions in the Middle East. Discover more at aquanow.com.
Money Majlis is brought to you by E&, a global technology group.
Money Majlis is brought to you by Intellect Design Arena, driving digital adoption in banking and insurance.
Money Majlis is brought to you by Live Digital Bank, powered by Emirates NBD. Trust and innovation combined.
Money Majlis is brought to you by Network International, the leading digital payments technology company in the Middle East and Africa.
Today's guest on Money Majlis is Adrian Simpson, CEO of Wavelength. Adrian has spent his career visiting the boardrooms and shop floors of some of the world's most admired, successful, and innovative organizations. In the last few years, Adrian has visited Silicon Valley titans like Apple, Airbnb, Tesla, and Netflix, iconic service organizations like Ritz-Carlton, Four Seasons, Southwest Airlines, Chinese powerhouses like Alibaba and Xiaomi, famous European brands like Lego, Pret-a-Manger, and India's famous Arvind Eye Care System. What a job, Adrian. He has toured the first Apple store with the legendary designer Jonathan Ive, engaged Al Gore to speak on sustainability, and has interviewed numerous CEOs and thought leaders across the world. Most importantly, Adrian has taken hundreds of leaders inside leading organizations in Silicon Valley, in China, in Israel, India, and throughout Europe. These include BBC, Dyson, and Tesco's executive boards. I went on a tour with Adrian in Silicon Valley way back in 2014, and I looked at the entire world very differently after the tour. Through their lens, Adrian has observed the defining elements of success. He's a storyteller at heart, and he brings to life how such organizations remain at the forefront and how truly authentic leaders lead. So in today's episode of Money Majlis, we will get from him some nuggets of insights into effective leadership. Adrian lives in rural Buckinghamshire and is joining me today on a Teams call. Adrian, how are you doing? Are you still doing an enviable 4-day week and enjoying your 3-day weekends walking, swimming, running, and playing bad tennis?
Indeed, I am. I'm in just out in Buckinghamshire today. The sun is shining, and when we finish this podcast, I've got one more call, and I'm off to play tennis. And I am attempting to take off tomorrow as well, which is on my Friday. But I had a bank holiday Monday in the UK, so a 3-day week might even be challenging for me.
Wonderful. That's an amazing life you lead. And then when you work, you get to visit some of the most iconic companies in the world and talk to some amazing leaders, right?
Yes. In fact, I've just literally, I was in Paris last week on holiday. The week before, I was in Silicon Valley with a colleague, and I spent the week visiting with OpenAI, with NVIDIA, with Apple, with Netflix, and many of the leading VCs and thought leaders in advance of a program we are running for the executive team of one of the world's largest retailers at the end of June. So I was out there really just sort of getting under the skin of their those companies, their stories, and crafting the most compelling agenda for our clients on the topics that they've emphasized are most relevant for them.
Excellent. Let me start then, Adrian, by asking you about the topic that's been probably one of the most discussed in management and business over the past many decades. What makes an organization a high-performing one? Now, you started working your career with Guru Tom Peters, who was one of the first, I would say, to lay out the characteristics of high-performing organizations in his very seminal book, In Search of Excellence, which we've all read and which introduced the famous 7S framework adopted by McKinsey. Tom Peters spoke about the features such as bias for action, staying close to the customer, sticking to the knitting, autonomy, productivity, and others that differentiated successful organizations then. Now times have changed. Fast forward to today, your organization Wavelength highlights areas that are partly in common, like customer obsession, and also features some new ones. Adrian, tell us a bit more about what makes for high-performing organizations today in the age of AI and empowerment, and what has changed in the last few decades.
At Wavelength, we have defined what we think are the 10 characteristics of high-performing organizations that cover off a number of aspects. I wouldn't propose I go through all 10 now, but I would highlight a number of ones which I think are fundamental. For me, I do think it all begins with recruitment. I think one of the most universal traits that I have seen that underpin the cultures of super high-performing organizations is a relentless, obsessive focus on recruitment. They're incredibly clear on the caliber of the people they're looking for. On the whole, they're looking for people. They emphasize recruiting for attitude over skill. So try to understand the values, the kind of DNA of the person. If you're a service organization, you're trying to work out, is this the kind of person who's charming to the interviewer or rude to the waiter? So they've got very clever process to try and get under the skin of that. So at Airbnb, for example, they have an entire separate values committee that assesses a candidate's values. You've got one group of people looking at people's skill set and another assessing their values, and nobody, including Brian Chesky, can make an appointment unless the values committee passes that individual. So, so many stories about just how obsessive companies are around that need to really assure you are recruiting for the right kind of candidate. I think.
Let me stop you there, Adrian, for a minute. I mean, ironically, most companies recruit for skills and talent and competencies, and much less for attitude and values. Correct?
100%. I think most companies pay scant or no attention to it at all. And I think actually it needs to be completely flipped. And I think they're quite clever about it. I mean, one of the, just give you a quick example. So Southwest Airlines, who I think, stood the taste of time as being one of the world's most admired companies, certainly the world's most admired airline. And they were telling me, if you are invited for an interview at Southwest Airlines at a certain, level of seniority, one of the things they will do is before you get to the interview with the chief people officer, and if you get to her room, they will check back on the entire value chain of every single person you've met. So they talk to the crew on the plane that flew you over. They check to the receptionist at the hotel they put you in at last night. They talk to the shuttle bus driver who drove you to the interview in the morning to the head office.
Wow.
They'll talk to their receptionist, who they call the director of first impressions, because that's actually what they are, right? And if at any point you have been rude or discourteous, your interview is terminated. Because they're going that so you're kind of being interviewed when you don't know when you're being interviewed, which is very, very clever, right? And so, that kind of level of detail, and then that kind of obsession. So recruitment is one. I think another massive one, what makes a high-performing organization, and this is one I think most organizations come unstuck on, is relentless alignment. Where so many organizations talk about, because there is a truth in life and a truth in business, which is what gets measured, recognized, rewarded, and celebrated gets done, period. And you'd be a very strange leader not to behave in a way which is recognized, rewarded, celebrated. Yet time and time again, I sit with organizations where they talk about We're an innovation culture. We're a customer service obsessed culture. Yeah, everybody knows basically the last person that innovated and it failed basically got shot and they're buried in the car park next to the person who delighted the customer. It cost the company money and they're also, got exited quickly. Yet they see their peer who basically hasn't innovated, hasn't delighted the customer in their life, behaves in a fairly appalling way, but makes sales performance or budget cuts and goes up the food chain, right? And they look and they say, so hang on, you talk about innovation, you talk about customer service, but actually we know because we observe what happens.
Right.
And so there is where great organizations don't do that. They say, what is important to us, right? Are we a customer service organization? Are we an innovative organization? Are we risk-taking, right? How do we recognize, promote, reward that behavior? That is, I think, where vast majority of companies fall down. There is spectacular gap between what they say they stand for and actually when it comes down to what are they recognizing, rewarding, and celebrating.
But tell me on that score, Adrian, I mean, this conflict always exists in all organizations, especially financial services ones, where sales and revenues are given more importance than service and values. How do companies reconcile that? I mean, I could be a great customer service person who's not meeting my sales targets. What should a leader do then? Because most companies default to being sales focused as opposed to service focused. Now, we all know they get together, they go hand in hand. But really, when it comes to the crunch, most leaders reward sales. Do you see this differently in the successful companies you visit?
Well, I think it's about a belief in what's your success formula, right? So I think actually that in the longer term, organizations that invest hugely in their people to create a strong culture, which drives a culture of service excellence, drives sustained sales performance and growth, because it is becoming incredibly hard, as you know, in a technology-led world where every marginal efficiency is being driven out by artificial intelligence to differentiate yourself.
Yeah.
And so I've believed for a long time, actually, that probably the success of the future of organizations is both the high tech and the high touch. And if you can get those two things right, that is a winning formula. And I think, that high touch is around empathy and human understanding and humor and all those traits that humans hold dear, right? And so I think if you from a service perspective, you have to sort of hardwire that into your organization alongside just some of the technology that takes care of the efficiency. So it's a brilliantly efficient process, but when you need the human in the loop, they are there. And, it's those qualities that achieve. And I think it's that a belief actually that increasingly service that you can only differentiate between service excellence. And so if that's true, if you've got a colleague who basically is great at service, but maybe perhaps not quite on the sales, maybe there's some nurturing and coaching needs to be done there, right? To say, okay, what is it that, what are you doing? How could I support you? How could I help you to come alongside them? But also to recognize and reward the fact they are delivering great service, because that's really important. But maybe remind them also that they have some metrics and maybe they just need to be, I don't know, there may be a bit more, there may also be a bit more of a closing that needs to be trained in. So
Correct.
Delighted the customer, surprise, fantastic, but you've always got to remember that close, and so maybe it may be a job of coming alongside them and giving it a little bit of coaching, but do not start to not recognize what they're doing on the service front.
Okay, so we talked about recruitment, we talked about alignment.
The old thing about, authentic leadership, Suvo, you and I know that, the quality of leaders in an organization is so critical, and how they behave is so critical to any organizational success. And, I've been around so many incredible leaders and incredible organizations, and I think there's some principles that are, really important that leaders adhere to. One of my favorite quotes ever is around the kind of the principle of being sort of on message as senior leaders. And it's a quote from Terry Kelly, who's the former CEO of W.L. Gore and Associates, the company behind Gore-Tex, one of the most innovative companies in the world. And she said, if you have director in your job title, you have forfeited the right to complain in public. And, I just think that cuts to the essence sometimes of great leadership. And I don't see that. I see so many leaders in my companies, my large corporate clients who, frankly, are incredibly happy to badmouth the organization, badmouth, because ultimately the only thing of significant importance that leaders do is to create and manage culture. And that was, great late Ed Schein said that from MIT.
Yeah.
So if you take that notion, the only thing of real importance leaders do is create and manage culture, and you believe in that. And then you take that statement, which is, if you've director in your job title, you've forfeited the right to complain in public. If you don't do that, and you're the kind of leader that sits around a boardroom table or at a retreat, and you nod vehemently in agreement with everything, and the second the meeting finishes, you undermine everything that's been said, and even worse, everyone who said it. What kind of culture are you creating? So I think, we speak about leadership a lot more, but, principles around, that unleashing potential, great leaders are really, really great also at unleashing potential. There's a amazing leader in the UK, Baroness Sue Campbell. I don't think any one person has ever done more for sport in Britain. She ran the Olympics in 2012, laid the foundations for the Rio Olympics in 2018. She took over women's football to the glories of the Euros, the World Cup finals. I mean, amazing woman. And she talks about, when she steps into a leadership position and she's meeting, new team members, that she likes to ask three questions. And I think these are some of the three best questions, I think, as a leader you could ever ask your people, which is, what do you do? What could you do? And what's stopping you? It's, three great questions that enable her to kind of unleash potential. I mean, I think there are other ones. I mean, I'm going to talk about innovation later. I think, I hope we are, bold stance in innovation. We are in the most complex, fast-paced business environment ever, right? And so I think a need to really, really ensure you're innovating at speed and implementing quickly and scaling where it is appropriate as possible. I think the other one is, relentless focus and execution. And again, so many companies fail at this. That you have to have a real clear focus and a real execution machine. And I think I think a lot of companies don't. I think at Apple, there was a great. You mentioned Johnny Ive in the interview. There was a fantastic clip, and I would encourage anyone to watch this online. If you Google Johnny Ive, I think it's like the art of saying no. He talks about where Steve Jobs would sit with him every week, and the first question Steve would say to him is, "What have you said no to this week?" And how he said he would rattle off a number of things, but he said he also knew that Steve knew that he didn't really care about those things deeply, and then he would push him further and push him further. He said saying no is all about something with every single fiber of you being you kind of want to do, but it's not core to the business, and that's really a distraction but he said ultimately Apple, it's about dedicating like 100% to one project and not 20% to five. And I think so many companies fall into the 5 different priorities. Well, you haven't got 5 when you've got 5 priorities. You haven't got when you've got 5 priorities, you might as well have none. And so I think Apple are a masters of relentless focus and execution. So yeah, I mean, communication, Suvo as well. I mean, I think, great organizations are amazing at communication. How do you ensure you have the right information to the right people in the right time? And again, so many companies I've seen, are masters of that, whether it's either through their physical environment or just, clever processes, and you see brands like, in the service industry, Four Seasons or a Mandarin Oriental or a Ritz-Carlton, they all have a variant of something, I think Ritz called the lineup, which is, every hotel, every shift, every day, including the head office, where they do a sort of cascading information to every single frontline employee, every board member, everyone's involved. It's non-negotiable. Where they talk about, what's happening globally, what's happening locally, But in the Ritz-Carlton world, they also every third day they tell a legendary story of service excellence
Yep.
delivered by a frontline lady. They call them ladies and gentlemen, serving ladies and gentlemen.
Yep.
So you think about that and you think, well, okay, so I've been a new hire employee at Ritz-Carlton, and after the first year, I've heard of over 100 stories of service excellence delivered by somebody at my level to a guest, right? Now, that is a brilliant communication process because that's about education and it's about empowerment.
Correct. Now, talking about empowerment, Adrian, Ritz-Carlton is a great example of empowerment in the front line. Given the world of centralization, we are seeing a lot of frontline staff being disempowered rather than
Yeah.
being empowered. What
Yeah.
are some of the examples of good empowerment you're seeing across the world?
Well, I think, there's a lovely Ritz-Carlton example, actually. I know, and I think there's a lesson in this also as well, this example about also great leadership. And so, Ritz-Carlton have a principle around, any frontline lady, they say ladies and gentlemen, serving ladies and gentlemen can spend $2,000 to solve a customer's problem, which means hypothetically speaking, if you were checked into a room and your television doesn't work and you were to open the corridor door and there's a cleaner, they could buy you a new television. That's, hypothetically speaking. And there's, but the example I wanted to give was I was in China a few years back with a colleague, and they checked into a hotel Ritz-Carlton with me, and they put my colleague in a smoking room, and she had an allergy to smoking. So she rang down and they said, no problem. And they moved her to a sort of comparable room. And the next day I was with the general manager, a wonderful guy by the name of Ralph Grippo. And I said to him, hypothetically, I said, what would have happened if the frontline receptionist, upon receiving the phone call from Jenny, had upgraded her to the penthouse suite, which was in her gift? And he said, I would do three things. He said, number one, he said, I would have thanked her for delighting Jenny. Like saying, brilliant job for absolutely wowing that guest. Fantastic. Thank you for doing that. Number two, I would have explored other ways in which she could have perhaps delighted Jenny that might not have cost us $2,000 worth of revenue, because if the guest then wanted to check into the penthouse, it's sold, right?
Yeah.
And thirdly, he said, I would have made it clear that the fact it perhaps didn't make the optimum choice in that moment was my fault, not hers, because I hadn't trained her properly.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think, that sort of, but I think that kind of principle of, just empowering people to solve the customer's problem, first time, it was, I think it was, I can't, there was a bank in America I did some work with called Umpqua Bank a number of years ago.
Yes.
Amazing organization. And I think their whole principle was, you have to ask basically one person to say to actually yes and two people to say no, right? And so it was like, we want you just to solve the customer's problem, right? And if you don't want to solve the customer's problem, you have to get like two sign-offs, because it was the reverse, which was, we just want you at the front line to, and again with Umpqua, I remember there was this is a retail-facing bank, right? They had a silver telephone at the back of every single branch, whereby you could walk up to it as a customer and press button number 8, and you were straight through to the president and CEO of the company, right? And if you couldn't get through, they'd make an appointment for you to call them back at the relevant time. But the point there was also about driving empowerment, because if you are an employee at an Umpqua bank and you're having a customer issue, and all they've got to do is to walk 20 yards to the back of the store, pick the telephone up and press button number 8, my God, are you incentivized to solve that customer's problem?
Absolutely. Yet, Adrian, we see service levels in banking industry across the world being so subpar, right? I mean, despite all the management lessons we learn, it is quite sad that service levels in the industry generally, I would not speak on banking. I think it's in most industries, and I know Financial Times had a study done a few months back about industries in UK, and invariably the customer feedback on bulk of the industries was that service standards really, really are subpar.
Yeah.
Why is that? Why do you think companies don't understand the value of service and the linkage to revenues and customer loyalty and repeat purchase and address this?
I think it comes down to a fundamental approach to your business ethos, right? So, the great service organizations in the world don't put the customer first, they put the employee first. And I think that's the shift, which is, in order to create a great sustainable service culture, you have to create a great sustainable people culture, right? And I don't think enough organizations do that, where they genuinely say, people, not the horrible world are our most important asset. The great organizations believe with every fiber of their being that their employees are their secret sauce, and I mentioned earlier, they go to extraordinary lengths to recruit them. They go to extraordinary lengths to make sure they're rewarding the right metrics, right? So if we want to be a service organization, let's make damn sure we're rewarding service excellence. That they're communicating the right information to the right place, but they're recruiting the right kind of leaders and promoting the right kind of leadership behaviors, right? Which encourages, service delivery. I mean, Southwest called it servant leadership, right? It's a model. And so, but, belief that if you put the people at the absolute epicenter of your organization and you nurture them and recruit them and develop them, then they will in turn deliver excellence in customer service and customer experience, because they're feeling fulfilled, they're feeling respected, they're feeling educated, they are, walking into the office physically, virtually every day with a kind of smile on their face, upbeat. They feel good about themselves. And if they are, then I think there's a really great chance that they will then transfer that. I mean, someone once said to me, and I've never, ever found a better description, that selling is transferred enthusiasm.
That's interesting.
Right? And I think, so if you can create a culture which promotes, people to sort of love your business, to be an enthusiast for your company and your organization, that transfers itself, right, to your customers, right?
Correct.
And I think comes across in great service. I mean, I'm sure you've had it, Suvo. You've walked into a market stall or a shop or somewhere with no intention of buying. Right?
Correct.
And you meet the artisan or the owner or just a frontline assistant, or it could be, in a bank, and you suddenly have this incredible high quality conversation, and you walk out half an hour later having spent $200 going, what the hell just happened? What's happened is you've been taken in by somebody's transferred enthusiasm, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think it's a lack of attention to the culture of the organizations, which leads to a lack of engagement from employees, which leads to poor transactional customer experiences, because a lot of employees just don't give a damn about the company they work for, never mind the customer they're serving.
Absolutely. Adrian, let's talk a little bit now about innovation. A recent McKinsey survey states that senior leaders from companies across the world rated the ability to innovate as the most important strategic factor for generating growth. Now, Wavelength's list of characteristics of high-performing organizations also includes one on innovation. Now, we know many companies struggle to innovate, whether it is due to a lack of top management focus, a fear of failure, or resistance to change. In your view, how do organizations effectively build innovation into their DNA? What is a good playbook that you've seen leaders and managers of successful organizations do or use to inculcate this in their own teams?
I would come at this from two angles. I'd come at it from a kind of cultural angle, and I'd come at it from a kind of organizational structure angle. So, just to reiterate, so from a culture perspective, as I've mentioned before, alignment is critical, right? You talk about innovation. Are you recognizing, rewarding, and celebrating innovation? Period, right? That's a massive cultural driver, because if you're not going to get an innovation culture. Secondly, I think there's, is it talked about? Is it a value? Is it recognized? Is it celebrated? And also culturally, what happens when people fail? Right.
Yeah.
And so, there was a great quote and a great story actually I heard recently in Silicon Valley. So the great quote actually is from Jason, I think it's Huang, I think he pronounced his surname, the CEO of NVIDIA.
Yeah.
And he has this great quote, and he says, unless you have a tolerance for failure, you will never experiment. And if you don't experiment, you won't innovate. And if you don't innovate, you won't succeed. Right?
Yeah.
It's a great quote. And the story I heard was that he was at an offsite at Davos, and he was talking to a bunch of CEOs and very influential leaders, and the person I met was in the room. And the story was around the sort of Blackwell chips failure incident, which wiped, significant amount of market cap off their business for a while. And Jason basically talked about what had happened, because they basically found out it fallen down to the responsibility of one key person. And Jason would basically talk to said, what do I do as the CEO when basically I've discovered that failure, that misstep was down to a mistake made by a very senior leader? And he said, the answer to the question is, I've promoted him.
Really?
And yeah. And he said, because two things. First of all, he has so much accumulated knowledge now, right, about about our business, but also what he's learned through that process. I don't want him taking to my competitors, right? But secondly, as I have said, if we don't have a tolerance for failure, no one will ever experiment. And if we don't experiment, we won't innovate. And if we don't innovate, we won't succeed, right? So if I'm going to hang him out to dry as a poster child of, if you basically fail, you're going to get fired, what do you think is going to happen to this culture, right? And so I think there's cultural things around, alignment, and that's a classic story, right? That's a quote from Jason.
Yeah.
That's alignment behavior from him, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's a whole thing around that. And again, even you could go back to, are you recruiting for some people who have a track record maybe of, breaking the mold, thinking differently? And you might want them all across your organization, but in certain pockets, you might want to look for kind of, people have more of a kind of innovation DNA.
Yeah.
But then the structural side of things, I think, is this. So I think there's a truth, which is when you are a multi-billion-dollar business, that 99% of your people are basically, or 100% people are currently engaged in serving today's customer, be it a business or B2B or B2C, a little bit better, right?
Yeah.
That's what your job is.
Yeah.
And you've got 24 million customers a day walking through your grocery stores, or 10 million people a week walking through your bank branches, or 100 million customers going online. That's great. But how do you innovate in that structure? Because basically their job is to really arguably do, make incremental improvements, right?
Yeah.
So that's business as usual. I think in this fast-paced world, you have to have a complementary business as unusual structure. And and classically this has been called a skunk works. Now, and there are lots of lessons to be found how not to do them, but I've seen some really great examples work. And the first important thing, I think, is if you're going to start a division in your company, which is being given responsibility for business as unusual, if you like, to really come up with step change new products and services, absolutely do not staff it with the external head of innovation who's done 5 years or 10 years outside of your company, because they know nothing about your business. They have no relationship equity internally, and they just don't know where the power bases lie, right?
Correct.
Where the ones where I've seen it successfully is you take really successful, with some of your top-rated people out of an operational role, where they've got massive credibility, they've got great networks internally, they understand the pain points of the organization, and they are then given responsibility, maybe not solely to like head up kind of the innovation sort of unit. And that has many strengths to it, because they understand the business, they understand the networks, they understand the relationship, their stuff. So I think there's a structural thing, and I've seen the second one is around about. There's a truth that in the mothership, everybody is recognized, rewarded, and celebrated for largely doing today a little bit better, not breakthrough innovation, not step change, not failure. So often in these innovation units, you have to deconstruct the rules that apply to the mothership to enable the innovation unit to do things differently, right? So years ago, I remember W.L. Gore and Associates set up an innovation lab in Silicon Valley. The guys behind Gore-Tex spent a lot of money building it, staffed it with some great people, but they weren't getting a throughput, basically, of startups. And then they brought in an expert. They said, here's the problem. Gore had a rule, which was we don't share our IP. Never share IP, right? And all the startups were going, well, I'm not interested then. Right? I want skin in the game, right? I want skin in the game with you. I want to share the upside. So it took a visit from the CEO to this unit and some conversations for her to get it, to then engage the legal people to say, we have to change our rules here, right? And the moment then they enabled the innovation unit to do deals with startups where they could show intellectual property and the upside, they were inundated with opportunities. And so sometimes you have to deconstruct the rules that apply in the mothership. And also, I think the positioning of the innovation unit. So what's its purpose? Because I think what you can do as well is you don't want it to be seen like the innovation unit is all the sexy, exciting, and the mothership does the crap stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so again, at Lego years ago, they used some very, very clever language, and they said they said the future group designed to invent the future of play, and they referred to themselves as diplomatic rebels.
Okay.
Brilliant, right?
Yeah.
And they talked about the importance of metaphorically and literally writing love letters to the mothership. The people working in it had worked at Lego a long time. B, they had worked with the operational units to understand real pain points, so they weren't working on some sort of weird concept that didn't relate to it.
Yeah.
But then C, when they started to come up with ideas, or maybe they brought in a startup which wasn't, in the core area of responsibility, they would invite people from the mothership to say, will you come and listen to this pitch? We need a bit of extra support. Would you give us some people to work on it? Do you want to come and hang out here for a week or two, right? Like constantly tying back, to the motherships. You're not this isolated skunk works.
Correct.
And so, in fact, my favorite example of this right now, and it's one of my favorite examples because the context is so extraordinary. There is a hospital in the UK called the Alder Hey Children's Hospital, which is the largest specialist children's hospital in Europe. It's National Health Service. So it's a government-run hospital. So with that comes a number of constraints. Number one, very limited access to funding. National Health Service, extremely funding limited. Number two, you will not operate it in a more highly regulated market than the life and death of children. I don't care about financial services or nuclear power stations.
Yep.
It doesn't get much more real than the life and death of children. You add on to that safeguarding protocols because you're in a children's hospital, and then you add on to that really tough public sector spending guidelines on what you can spend on even trains and hotels or whatever, right?
Yep.
So despite that, you have a 39-person innovation hub inside the hospital, where there are 5,000 staff in the main hospital, but this innovation hub, exactly in the rules I'm talking about, is run by one of the top pediatric surgeons with doctors on secondment, so they understand every single day the reality of what's happening in the mothership, but they also understand the pain points. And what their role in as the innovation unit is to say, how do we take the most pioneering technologies that we can get our hands on, artificial intelligence, robotics, prototyping, data, spatial computing, whatever it is, and how do we apply those technologies to solve operational issues in the hospital, create efficiencies, new operational procedures. So give you an example. So they recently have done a partnership, and this is, a hospital in Liverpool, England, has done a partnership with an Australian startup called Lyra, who have developed an ambient AI, which means that currently, after every consultation, every consultant and doctor has about a 10-minute period to make notes, write notes up, right? This piece of ambient AI now the way it works is you walk into the consultation and the doctor says, Suvo, do you mind if I record this on ambient AI? And of course, assuming and explain why, you say yes. The consultant now has a consultation with you, and during that consultation, they may ask you about, how was your weekend? You played tennis, all the rest, all that. But then they'll talk about what's going on for you medically.
Yep.
At the end of that consultation, that consultant patient leaves the room and can now say, right, produce me a report for that patient, and it will do it produce me a report for the medical records department, which is indexed and all the rest of it. They can even say, because this is a children's hospital, produce me a report for Johnny, and Johnny is 6 years old, and it will produce a report in the form of a story. Okay? Once upon a time, Johnny had a tummy ache and he went to the doctor, all that kind of stuff, right? Its ability to produce those reports in sub 60 to 90 seconds, right? So in tests, they're now implementing this throughout the hospital. They are reducing the amount of time it takes a consultant post-consultation from 10 minutes down to 3.
Wow. Okay.
And you're doing 8 to 10 consultations per surgeon, per doctor per day. So you have improved the operational, the amount you've basically created about a 30-minute per day increase in efficiency of every doctor and consultant across your hospital.
It's amazing.
Now, the mothership can't do that. Right? Mothership can't do that because a mothership is too busy. But an innovation hub, which is tied so closely to the mothership, where the first person to trial the technology was the head of innovation, who's also a practicing pediatric surgeon, right? Can do it, right? So I think this notion of what's your business as unusual structure, who can take problems like that and say, how do we come at this differently, I think is so critical in a world as fast-paced and moving as now.
Absolutely. This is a good time for a commercial break to allow my sponsors to promote their offerings. But before we break, let me remind you to visit my giving website, give.moneymajlis.com, to view the 6 charities that I've shortlisted for this season of the podcast. These are Dubai Cares, Red Crescent, Global Fund for Women, Jaipur Foot, World Central Kitchen, and the Orangutan Conservancy. In every episode, my guest gets a $1,000 gift card that he or she chooses to donate to one of these 6 causes, and for every episode, 50 listeners get a $50 gift card to donate. You just have to visit give.moneymajlis.com and click on the charity of your choice to donate $50. The money from my sponsors will go straight into the charity on your behalf. It's that simple. So please remember to visit my website and join me in making a difference to someone, somewhere. Thank you. Now to the commercial break.
The financial world is changing fast. Institutions need to meet the growing client demand for crypto financial services, but they need a battle-tested platform to build upon.
AquaNow is a leading crypto financial services platform, powering incumbent institutions to launch crypto brokerage, payments, and remittance services for their clients, securely and at scale.
Be part of the transformation. Visit aquanow.com today.
The end touches your life
in more ways than you can imagine.
You want more tech,
more speed,
more convenience,
more entertainment,
more business solutions.
EAN gives you all that
and so much more. EAN. Go for more.
Parents teach their children to talk, to walk, to ride, to read. So why not teach them about managing their money? Introducing the all-new Live Light app, designed to teach 8 to 18-year-olds good money habits. A free and totally secure app designed for them that's always under your control. Top up their cards, set limits, assign tasks, and reward them with allowances. Download the LiveX app to open a Live Light account in minutes, and the first 50 dirham allowance is on us. Visit live.me today. Live Digital Bank by Emirates NBD. Trust and innovation combined. T's and C's apply.
Money Majlis is brought to you by Intellect Design Arena. Intellect drives digital adoption in banking and insurance. Leverage emac.ai, the most comprehensive, composable, and intelligent open finance platform for banking and insurance transformation. Intellect Design Arena.
The end touches your life
in more ways than you can imagine.
You want more tech,
more speed,
more convenience,
more entertainment,
more business solutions.
EAN gives you all that
and so much more. EAN. Go for more.
Money Majlis is brought to you by Network International, the Middle East, and Africa's digital payments champion. We make business happen and economies prosper by simplifying commerce and payments. Trusted by over 250 banks, fintechs and telcos, and 130,000 merchants in over 50 countries. Bringing you tomorrow's payment solutions today.
Welcome back. Today we are talking to Adrian Simpson, Chief Connector of Wavelength, and the one guy who has seen more companies at close range than anyone else I know. Adrian, I want to get your view on the much talked about concept of networking, considered a critically important skill for future leaders and managers. Now, a lot of people don't like doing it, as they see it as a distraction or something that is only self-serving. Now, I've been a networker throughout my career and I've learned so much from differing perspectives. Your take on networking, Adrian, has been to not do this randomly, but to instead focus on creating your own network or your own, as you call it, personal boardroom, with people playing roles such as inspirers, challengers, anchors, and so on. You call yourself a chief connector. What is your advice, Adrian, to both young and experienced managers of today on how to build this key muscle of networking? How can professionals develop their own personal boardrooms?
To be clear about my view on this, I think the word networking should be eliminated from the English language and the practice outlawed, frankly, as defined by the concept of, get invited to a networking event where you turn up and you get a name badge, served a glass of warm wine, you walk around a room with 200 people that you don't know, being served bad food, and are you desperately hoping to meet somebody interesting, and you leave an hour and a half later, hungry, thirsty, and having met nobody of interest. Utter futile waste of time, and I just think it should be outlawed. What I talk about is not networking, but the concept of networks, right? Okay. Which is very different. And I think which is what networks, what specific connections do you need to forge? And this concept of the personal boardroom, I think, is brilliant. And the personal boardroom is a book. You can even download the tool, but it really gets specific. And it says, okay, right, given, so if you imagine that the visual of the concept of the personal boardroom is this. So if I invited you now, Suvo, to look over your shoulder and there's a table behind you and there are 12 chairs around it. What the personal boardroom methodology has done is to define, ideally, you would have somebody in each of those chairs playing a different role for you. And so, and some of those roles could be, and some of them I love them. So it sounds a little trite, but they have one called the nerve giver, right? Which you imagine you are going into the boardroom, you'll be invited by the chair, you're absolutely panicking inside. Who's the person that you call that isn't your spouse or your mother that says, Suvo, you're gorgeous, you've got this. I believe in you, right? Who's that person that gives you that confidence, right? Who's your champion, right? Who's your sponsor, right? Who's talking about you? You're a young executive, you want to go up the food chain quickly. Who is talking about you at the right table when you're not in the room, right? Yeah. Who's your sponsor? Who's your, who is your connector? So actually decide that you want to forge connections with people outside of your current company industry. Who has the very best black book that you know? Not only that, has a generosity of spirit about them, where it's one phone call to say, Suvo, you want to get into company X. You phoned up this person and they say, Suvo, leave it with me, and 24 hours there's an email saying, Suvo, meet X, meet Y, right? Yeah. Who's your mentor? Who's your coach, right? Literally go around the table. And so I think what's great is when you do that piece of work and you kind of go, okay, where am I weak right now? Okay, do I have a mentor? Do I have a coach? Do I have a sponsor? Do I have a nerve giver? Do I have a voice of the customer? You can get quite precise and go, okay, well, I've got a gap here, okay? And that gives you, then you're really targeted, right? So you're not randomly walking into a room, you're going, this is the role I need. And then I think, what advice would I give you? Well, I would say, I think this goes to a bigger point. I think it has never, ever, ever been a more difficult time to be a leader. If you step back and look at the complexity of the world right now, if you look at the array of topics that we as leaders are supposed to have, an expert opinion on, or if you look at all the topics, so if you imagine, my visual almost is, if you imagine the diagram that's in my head, there's a leader in the middle of the diagram, and going off it is a whole bunch of arrows to different topics that you are supposed to have an opinion on, whether it is, geopolitics. I mean, God, have we ever been in a more geopolitically unstable time, right? Whether it's mental health, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it's the future of work, whether it's sustainability, whether it's supply chains, whether it's new regulatory frameworks coming in, and you just go around it and you go, oh my God, you are overwhelmed. And I think you have to have your radar on and your antennae up in a way you've never had before to what's happening outside of your industry, what's happening outside of your sector, in order to basically because if you're operating in the echo chamber of your own organization and your own sector in a world this complex and this fast moving, it is not good enough. And so I think it's incumbent on you as a leader now, or whatever stage you are, to look up and look out and to develop this muscle around external connectivity. And so, I think that like the personal boardroom methodology is a great way of doing that. And, it just, I know it's just getting really, really practical, but, I'm a massive user of LinkedIn, right? To find mutual connections. I'm always looking for an introduction rather than going cold. Or if I was to go onto your LinkedIn profile, Suvo, and see that you're connected with somebody, first thing I would do is I'd send you a message that begins with the subject matter, how well do you know, fill in the blank, right? But establish whether it's someone you know really, really well or somebody you met at a conference. And then if you go, I know them really well, I'll go, right, okay, this is what I'm interested, can you help me? And if that person then it says, yes, I can introduce you. What do you need from me, Suvo, to make that introduction as easy as possible, right? Do you need to send you a note that you essentially just top and tail? So make it as easy as possible. And then critically follow up and acknowledge and tell the person what happened as a result of that introduction, right? Because I cannot tell you, and reciprocate wherever you can and say, thank you so much. What can I do for you in return? Even if it isn't now and you can't offer something, maybe in years in time, you're able to reciprocate, but make it very clear you value it, you respect it, you make it easy for that person to make the introduction, you tell them what happened as a result of it, and you just continue to put currency through them.
So, Adrian, your personal boardroom concept is fascinating. Do you know successful leaders who actually have these boardrooms for their own use?
Oh yeah, I think that some of the best leaders that I've met are now plugged into powerful external networks as a way to ensure that their finger is on the pulse of what's happening outside their industry, outside of their sector, and because it's about pattern identification, it's about pattern verification, it's about getting inspiration, ideation, which is all, sort of the work that Wavelength tries to do. We're trying to help our clients to, connect with leaders from outside of their industry, outside of their sector, so they can forge those connections and get that external, say, inspiration, education, provocation, maybe even, verification to help them go, okay, we're here now. Where do we want to be, right? And so, I've seen it in spades.
Okay. Adrian, let's talk now about culture. Peter Drucker, the management guru, famously said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Now, we all know culture is the secret sauce that drives high-performance organizations. It's what probably keeps customers happy, employees motivated. Yet it is so difficult to arrive at what is the right culture for my organization, for your organization. And how does one instill this across? Now, in your view, does the industry you operate in influence the type of culture that a company should be in? For example, a fintech versus an airline versus a restaurant. What about social factors, to the country and environment which your firm operates? Are we in UK? Are we in India? Are we in Tanzania? Are we in US?
I think so. Two parts to that question. One of which is around does your culture depend on your the business sector you're on, and how does it change depending on the geography and the kind of the demographics. Yes, I think your culture is influenced by your industry sector. I think so if you take the hospitality industry, where you're going to be wanting, empathy and understanding and kindness to be probably really core facets of your culture, because that's what you want your customers to experience.
Yeah.
I think it's really important. And in fact, you started, one of my absolute favorite examples, and this sort of links up both points, I think, hopefully, is the incredible Aravind eye care system in India, which is the largest specialist provider of eye care in the world, as you know.
Yeah.
Its productivity is 5 times greater than any other eye care surgeon in the world. Their cost is about 100th of the National Health Service Division of cataract surgery. Their EBITDA hasn't dropped below about 37% in 50 years. They're at the forefront of AI to eliminate needless blindness. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, which is why we take clients to go visit Aravind. In fact, we're going back in February next year on our Power of Purpose program. But their purpose is to eliminate needless blindness, right? And if your culture, if that's your purpose, eliminate needless blindness, well, of course, you want as part of that a culture of, and they serve often the rural poor, right? They serve both the very mass affluence because they have a wonderfully clever cross-subsidy business model where you go to Aravind to have your cataract done because it is absolutely the best in the world, bar none, including the Mayo in the US. So you will pay, but they then use that money to enable them to serve the rural poor who pay nothing for their service or dime on the dollar. And, but when you're serving that target market of the rural poor, empathy and understanding and kindness is so important, right? So you have that kind of culture. Versus, you're right. If you are, I've just come back from, OpenAI and Nvidia and, all these kind of, or your, Alibaba or your kind of, your Xiaomi or what have you, and operating in the absolute epicenter of some of the two technological hubs of the world, China and Silicon Valley, right? And the pace is relentless and, breakneck. You want a culture of speed and agility and failure and, because, that's the environment which you're operating in. I think to the second point, I think what's really important is the principle, the core components of your culture, I think don't change geographically, but the execution does.
Okay.
So at Wavelength, we're great believers in this concept of look for the principle, not the execution, right? And so let me give you an example, linking up two completely different organizations. So we went to Southwest Airlines a number of years ago, and we witnessed the most incredible welcoming of new hire employees I've ever experienced. So we turned up as a Wavelength group. We put our bags down at 8:30 in the morning, and we were asked to come out to the main lobby of the Love Field office, where there was a red carpet right the way down the middle of the hallway. And at that moment, the front doors opened and 200 brand new Southwest Airlines employees, ramp agents, call handling center people, pilots, technicians, all turned up for the first minute of the first day of their employment as Southwest Airlines employees. Alongside the carpet was 150 Southwest Airlines employees with klaxons and hooters and, shouting and hollering, welcome signs, welcome to Southwest Airlines. As you walked down this red carpet as a new hire employee, they were just like blown away. People were just got their phones out and they were like, oh my God, oh my God. Now, the principle there is significant emotional engagement. Right?
Yeah.
How are you creating significant emotional engagement with new hire employees on what is one of their most important days ever in their career, which is when they join you? I had a lady from the Aravind Eye Care System with me on that program. And she, along with everybody else in the group, was like, oh, my God, if I benchmark that to what we do, I am embarrassed. Right? So now at Aravind, they employ 1,000 young women a year from rural communities in India, 16 years old, who are become the secret source of their productivity. And they induct them. And she looked at this. And when we went to India last year to visit Aravind, she said, Adrian, you're going to be very proud of me. And I was like, why? And she said, do you remember that induction at Southwest Airlines? I said, yes. She said, well, what we do now, she said, when the young women start, there's about 10 of them, when they walk through the door, we have a bed of rose petals on the floor, and there's about 7 or 8 of their peers from the previous cohort sprinkling them with water and other petals, right? No shouting, no hollering, totally culturally appropriate. Same principle.
Got it.
Significant emotional engagement. The difference between the execution in Dallas, Texas and India in Madurai could not be more diametrically opposed.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the trick is, to go, what's important to us as an organization, right? The same would be the same in a service organization. You don't want employees of the Four Seasons in Bali saying, good day you all, right? You know what I mean? Which would be great in Dallas. It would be horrific, right? You want that to be a localized, authentic, warm welcome and fond farewell. But it's you embracing the diversity of the people that you're employing,
right,
who are reflective of that country and culture. And you're asking them to do a warm welcome and a fond farewell, which in a way is totally culturally appropriate to the country in which they work, right?
Correct.
But still adhering to that principle of, we want a warm welcome and a fond farewell.
That's a great example. Adrian. Adrian, your company Wavelength runs sell-out global tours, where a small cohort of people are given the opportunity to gain immersive experiences, whether it's in Silicon Valley, visiting companies like Netflix or Google, or in China of late, the new epicenter of innovation, with companies like BYD and Alibaba. Now, given that China has been shaking up the markets with things like DeepSeek, BYD, green energy, and robotics, are you seeing more and more interest in your China tour? I had your colleague Christina Buttrop, the China expert, on my podcast a few months back, and we delved into what's happening in China. Tell me your views on China, and how do the two tours compare?
Well, I think, China... I think I mentioned earlier, I think you are now seeing a battle for supremacy between two technological superpowers, and I'm differentiating between America and Silicon Valley and then China. So it's kind of a Silicon Valley versus China. And, I'm not for a second going to dismiss the ability of, titans like, NVIDIA and OpenAI and Apple and so forth, and it's not just Silicon Valley, it's also Amazon's and, your Microsoft's up in Seattle to remain at the forefront of technologies. But what I am seeing in China is just breathtaking. And I am seeing more and more clients awaken to it, although I still don't think most quite understand the scale, the speed at which China has already gained supremacy in so many areas. And so I was actually thinking I was on a call yesterday with a client, and I prepared some notes to try and help her understand where China is at, because we took a group to China in October last year, and between October 19 and 24 this year, we're running a Wavelength Inside Digital China program that will take 20 leaders inside China once again. And if you look at the context for that, so last year alone, they manufactured 1/3 of all the world's products. 1/3 of all the world's products. They installed more robots and more solar panels in their factories last year than the rest of the world combined. There are 2 or 3 independent, very well-respected research institutes that reckon that China now ranks number 1 in 37 out of 44 industries.
Incredible.
They issued more research papers on AI and quantum computing than any other country last year. If you then look at their dominance in certain sectors, they control already 60% of the world's EV, electronic vehicles market. They control 65% of the battery market. They control 80% of the solar panel market. They control 70% of the drone market. And this one is really interesting, and I think quite, sensitive for people. By 2026, they will control 60% of the global renewable energy market, essentially making them the Saudi Arabia of Asia,
Correct.
of the new oil, right?
Correct.
You then look at companies. You've got BYD is now the world's number one manufacturer of cars. You've got Xiaomi. You mentioned at the start, number two now and number three, in mobile phones. You've got TikTok, obviously in short form media. You've got DeepSeek, challenging in AI. It goes on and it goes on. And I was on a call yesterday, and this is, so topical given, Trump's desire to bring manufacturing back to the US. I was on a call yesterday with my partners in China who did a visit last week to a factory run by Niao, one of the leading EV manufacturers in China, which is 95% operated by robots. And they reckon within a year or so, they will be at 100% remote, which means the world's first dark factory. No human beings in a manufacturing plant producing cars.
Incredible.
Right? I mean, the implications of this are absolutely profound, just profound. And so I think, what we saw last year, I mean, they control 50% of the periodic table, it just goes on and on. So I think when you look at that, and then you look at the geopolitical shift, arguably, brand America at the moment, let's take it, has taken a bit of a hit. The IMF is downgrading its growth forecasts. Do you see the epicenter of the world shifting towards America, or do you see it shifting towards Asia? And, China dominates, right? And of course, you add to that, Suvo, as they also control swathes of Africa and have massive influence on the parts of Asia, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think from a technological perspective or a geopolitical perspective, any businesses or businesses now cannot pay attention to China. I think it's absolutely critical.
Interesting. Very interesting. One quick question before I close with the final question. Adrian, how do you see the future of executive education changing in the coming years? In the age of AI, in the age of remote learning, outside in learning, etc. And how are you as Wavelength preparing for this future?
I mean, I think it is about, I think there's two answers to the question. I mean, I think, I think this idea of you have to ensure as part of your executive education that you are providing your leaders with that external lens, I think is getting critical and more critical, because say the pace of change, the scale of the change, it's coming at you left, right, and center. And I think, we are, from an AI perspective, we are, one of the biggest shifts in a generation is coming at us. And so I think you need to really help your leaders understand the scale of what is coming over the horizon at your businesses, because if they don't, and I am literally taking this executive team from this major grocer to Silicon Valley at the end of June, because the CEO was at a round table with Sam Altman in January this year. And as a result of that breakfast, and quite a few of his top team, having also been on my Silicon Valley and China programs, the CEO said to us, I now understand if we don't get ahead of this technology shift, we are toast. And this is one of the most respected, biggest grocery chains in the world, right? And I think he's absolutely right. So I think it is critical that and I think as a result of that as well, I think also people are feeling scared. And I think people are frightened. And I think you need to help your executives be as resilient and resourceful as possible to help them understand how they navigate themselves through this change. How do they help their teams through this change? And it's going to be tough and it's going to be frightening. And I think it's quite scary. But I think at the same side, you have to really help people double down on their, that resilience, that resourcefulness to help them get through and thrive through this.
Excellent. Final question, Adrian. You come from Northwest England, the home of Beatles, the home of the Liverpool Football Club, which I believe you follow. What are some of the management lessons one can learn from the Beatles and Liverpool?
Well, I think it has to be about teamwork, doesn't it? I think has to be. I mean, it's a cliche, but I mean, I don't know. Also, I think, is it teamwork? I think, maybe the Beatles was just, an incredible combination of four individuals with different but also complementary skill sets, right? Coming together, gelling together, innovating together, creating together to create just, magic throughout the world, right? And a passion. They loved what they did. They were, songwriters, musicians extraordinaire. And then Liverpool, I think it's two things, isn't it? One is, they're on the verge. They are 1 point away now, Suvo, from winning their 20th Premiership title, which will rival Man United. So one draw or one more win, and we are there. But wow, the ability, of, and I think there's Thomas, two things. Jurgen Klopp was an extraordinary leader who cast a very, very big shadow, I think way beyond, just Liverpool, across the world of football, and iconic. But, in his first season, Slot actually was much quieter, much, more behind the scenes, has done an incredible job of taking an already good team and making it arguably even better, right? And so I guess there's a great lesson there in leadership about, you don't have to be the enigmatic front camera, chest pumping, you can be quiet, more behind the scenes. Calm leaders can be as effective as the front person. Don't be kidded by the charisma as being the, both great, but very different styles. And I think both of those leaders, managers, as many other managers of Liverpool have done before, is they've had the amazing ability to pick the right team and create a great culture in the locker room. They've had the locker room, they've had the hearts, and they've had the minds of the players, as great companies have the hearts and minds of their employees.
Adrian Simpson, connector, storyteller, leadership observer, and entrepreneur, thank you so much for joining me at Money Majlis today with so many interesting insights and stories. I really appreciate your time today. And thank you, Adrian, for confirming that you will donate your $1,000 gift card to the Global Fund for Women, the charity that you have chosen from my shortlist of 6. As a listener, you too can get a gift card of $50 by visiting give.moneymajlis.com and clicking on the charity of your choice to redeem your gift card. Thank you for joining in my giving movement.
Money Majlis is proudly supported by Aqua Now, the premier crypto-as-a-service provider, now building in partnership with the top financial institutions in the Middle East. Discover more at aquanow.com.
Money Majlis is brought to you by E&, a global technology group.
Money Majlis is brought to you by Intellect Design Arena, driving digital adoption in banking and insurance.
Money Majlis is brought to you by Live Digital Bank, powered by Emirates NBD. Trust and innovation combined.
Money Majlis is brought to you by Network International, the leading digital payments technology company in the Middle East and Africa.
So that's it for this episode of Money Majlis. Goodbye. Till next time, stay well and do good.